Hello, everybody. I am not with you this week, but I want to give you a quick little rundown of what's going on with the Russian Revolution. So there's two parts to this. There's part one and part two. I'm going to walk you through both parts, and hopefully that will explain a lot of what's going on with the craziness of Russia. So, as you remember, Russia was involved in World War One, and they will leave Russia or they will leave World War One in 1917 because things just get too crazy. As I kind of wrote out in the board, they have a revolution, a civil war, and a possible government change is what's going to go on. So let's just go ahead and start with the Russian czars. So, the Russian czars have been autocrats, have had unlimited power. They've built these gorgeous palaces throughout the country, and they entertain guests, and they're rich and they're powerful. And they pretty much, like an autocrat would, they own everything. They own the railroads, they own the industrial plants, and the people are who are building these things for them. So they built this on the backs of the people. So under the czars, that's Nicholas II, in case you're wondering. Under the czars, there was no parliament or any other government branch to question them. There's no Congress or House of Representatives to keep people in check. And so, they also commanded the army, and they led the church, the Russian Orthodox Church, and they controlled all the peasants. So, the quote is, the czar is like a father, and his subjects are his children, and the children ought never to question their parents. And, it's just not the way life goes. It's not the way the world is going at this particular time, and this government style is not in favor. I think this is actually Nicholas I. His son is Nicholas II, who's going to be the czar during the Russian Revolution. And so these guys try to maintain 300 years of Romanov dictatorship, and it's not going to be successful. And this is kind of one of the, I don't know if you've ever heard of, I think it's called Furbage eggs. These are these special eggs given to the czar each year. They're super expensive, and each egg has a surprise inside. So these were kind of done at Easter, but this just shows you how ornate and over the top these governments were, that they're having these eggs created. I think they were created by Tiffany's, is who they created these eggs, but they're so incredible. Like they have moving parts. It's all gold leaf. It's all actual, and they sell between $4 and $15 million. So these are no joke. Some of them have little carriages. I mean, these are really, really rare things. But it just goes to show you that all the resources and the money that these people made or had were going more to the throne than they were to the people. In my opinion, the government, and this is probably the opinion of a lot of people, the government is there to function and operate for its people. And if the people are not happy, then guess what? Then you need to go in a different direction. And that's what they're going to do. So anyways, that's kind of like the background on the Romanov dynasty, just to give you a little background on what an autocrat was. That was the style of government. So now we're going to get into kind of what was going on. And this is probably our craziest slide. And you can always pause this if you want to write stuff down. But remember, in 1917, we have a revolution going on, and the people of Russia are not happy. The people who are fighting in the war are fighting with sticks. They don't have the resources, the fuel, the food, anything to be, successful in the war. And so they're going to come back, and they're going to be split into two different groups. We have the peasants, and we also have the industrial workers. Okay, we're going to start with the peasants first. The peasants are social revolutionaries who wanted land distributed fairly. So they wanted to just have access to land. And then the other side of this coin is the industrial workers. So the industrial workers can be broken down into Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. And the Mensheviks are the minority group who basically disagreed with the plan of taking over the government. And they wanted kind of a more slow-moving process, to use higher wages and give people the right to vote and welfare programs, and then maybe things would get better over time. However, Lenin, this is Lenin over here, Lenin wanted a complete takeover of the government. And he wanted an elite group to lead the revolution and set up a dictatorship for the working class. And this was kind of supposed to be what Karl Marx was pursuing, this idea of communism, where it's all about the workers and the people. So anyways, this is kind of what's happening. The two people who are probably the most important to the revolution is going to be Leon Trotsky and Vladimir Ulyanov Lenin. And, Lenin has issues with the Tsar because his brother was killed for trying to kill the Tsar, rightfully so. Like, you're going to die if you try to kill the Tsar. And so his brother was killed, so he wants to take over the government. Now, all the while this is going on, the White Army will fight the Bolsheviks, so these are the Bolsheviks, and 15 million people will die. You can keep track of this because there's a lot of people that are going to die in Russia over the next 4 or 5 years. So that's one thing that's going on as we set up this fight. So the Bolsheviks will take over. The Bolsheviks are going to win. They're called the Reds. The White Army is the army that represents the government. Okay, I'm going to move on. So hopefully that was clear. So now we're going to have a series of revolutions as we go through this revolution. It's like a 1-year revolution. So Nicholas II is the Tsar. He basically steps down. He fails to solve the problems of the government, economically, politically, socially, and they decide to elect a Duma. The Duma is kind of like a parliament. It would be like a Congress. So there's an assembly of people that are making decisions. They don't really have any real power over the Tsar, but people will still be desiring a constitution, which is, in over 192 countries today, of which our nation was the first to have a constitution. And so they really want social change. So eventually people start plotting this kind of overthrow of the Tsar. And when he leaves to go fight the war, basically, there he is, there's Nicholas II. He decides to go off to fight the war. He's trying to decide, should I go, should I not? He goes, and it's an absolute disaster. And eventually he'll come back from the war, he'll be arrested, and he will be killed along with his family. So why did they kill him? Well, because of the lack of weapons and ammunition, almost 2 million Russians will die. They had the most deaths of any country in the war, I should say that. And they were only in the war for 2 years, 2.5 years, something like that. So, but they blamed him. And supposedly this was supposed to be a time of unity and pride, and they just didn't have enough resources. And so that's what was going on. Now, to make things even worse, so they lose a war, they've got their Tsar killed, they're having a revolution with Lenin. There's a random guy that shows up named Father Grigory Rasputin. Father Grigory was a holy man, but he was holy only to a certain extent because he was a drunk, and he also slept with the other people of the royal family. His famous quote is, "My blessings are powerful." Anyways, he was illiterate, he's a holy man, and people feared that he was kind of taking over the government because he healed the royal family's son, right? So they healed him, and he had what's called, he would bleed from his nose occasionally. I think it's called a hemophiliac. So he would bleed from his nose, and they couldn't stop the bleeding, but Father Grigory Rasputin could actually stop the bleeding. So the nobles got fearful of him. They thought he was going to take over the government, so they eventually killed him. Weird about his death is he didn't actually die from the bullets. He actually drowned. So he was shot twice, poisoned twice, thrown in a river, and he wasn't dead from the bullets or the poison, but he was dead from the drowning. So it's like weird. Maybe the guy was a holy man. I don't know. So anyways, as we go through this February Revolution, eventually the workers are going to go on strike in the country, and eventually they had the troops kind of turn on the people. They said, we want the troops to fire on the people, and the troops wouldn't do it. And so that was kind of interesting. And Tsar Nicholas II leaves the throne, so he's going to go to be with the people at the front of the war, and this whole thing starts to kind of fall apart. So then the Duma says, let's set up a temporary government. We're going to write a constitution for our new Russian Republic. As the war continues, then the revolutionaries saw this as a time to possibly take over the government, and so Lenin and the Bolsheviks actually took over the government. To get out of the war, they needed to sign a treaty with Germany, and then they promised to pay them $20 billion. That's how they got out of the war. So you can't just leave the war, just be like, we're done, we're out. And by the way, that debt for Russia was paid back to Germany in 2019. So it took them almost more than 100 years to pay that back. This throne, by the way, has over 800 precious stones in it. You can just see the elaborate stuff that they had in and around their thrones and castles and kings. It was just too much. So now we have Lenin. Lenin's the new guy in charge, and the Bolsheviks, and he wants the workers' revolution to be what's most important. He's going to spread his ideas. I would call him think of him as like socialism rather than as true communism, as Karl Marx said. Karl Marx spread his kind of ideas that the factory workers should overthrow the leadership, and he believed that the working class should be in charge of the government. And so he wanted to create a small group of elites, like really smart people, to be in charge. So I would say he's more like socialism, but remember, Marxism is, a little bit more aggressive and a little bit different than what Lenin actually pursues. So just want to throw that out there. So the Bolsheviks will take power. This guy Kerensky over here is going to lead the provisional government. The Red Guard, groups of armed factory workers, attacked and overthrow the government. The workers are given control of the factories, and the land is distributed to the peasants. They have a new flag, which basically, notice the sickle and the hammer will represent the industrial workers and the agricultural workers. Kerensky was one of the last people to die from the revolution. This guy actually won't die till the 1970s, believe it or not. So now Lenin's in charge. We're heading into what's called the Civil War. So the Civil War is between the Reds and the Whites. And the Reds were the communists, the Whites were the counter-revolutionaries, so they don't necessarily they do represent the government, the old government, but the Whites are the counter-revolutionaries, otherwise known as kind of the more moderates, and the Reds were kind of the Lenin followers, so they were more the communists. So the Allies, or the Americans, the French, and the British supported the Whites, and this will lead to a tremendous amount of distrust of the communists, because we didn't like how aggressive they were being with their people. So as we go forward, we have the Russian Civil War. The communists use terror against the whites to control their own people. There's a secret police called the Cheka that they created forced labor camps to make people do things. They basically had what's called war communism. So then the government's now going to take over the banks and the factories and the railroads. Trotsky turned the Red Army into this major fighting force. So it's Trotsky and Lenin. And, they're trying to control the people. The Cheka was the first kind of secret organization. It was created in 1917 under Vladimir Lenin. And so basically they were there kind of patrolling the countryside and going around and doing whatever they want to do for them. And so then by 1921, the communists would control all of Russia and the Civil War will be completely over. So now Russia is communist and Lenin is going to be the new leader. He kind of created a new constitution, which, that's what most nations want. You could vote at 18. The Communist Party had control, not the people, just to make sure you guys know that. And so eventually, though, the people will start getting things that they've wanted. And they actually renamed the country the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So that's kind of a good thing. So now Lenin begins working on things. By the way, this is Jim Cramer, who looks like Lenin. I think it does. He says, bye, 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 if you've ever seen Jim Cramer. So now the state controls the banks. You're allowed to own a small business, which is kind of unique under communism. And they can own small plots of land, and they can sell the surplus of what they're doing. So this is called the New Economic Policy. I think this is a really good idea. You should make sure you write this down. So Lenin is kind of riding this line between communism and socialism, giving people rights, letting people have a say. That's all people want anyways. And so this is really moving the country forward. And so the results speak for themselves. There's going to be food production. There's going to be industrial production. Russia's economy begins to recover. It ended armed resistance against the government. And unfortunately, something really bad happens to Vladimir Lenin on May 13th, 1924. And he will be killed. This random lady approaches him, shoots him 3 times, once in the arm, once in the jaw, once in the neck, and the third bullet actually misses him. They took him to his apartment, and basically he's going to get the one bullet removed, the other bullet stays. He's going to have headaches and strokes for the rest of his life. You can see this picture over here. He looks kind of like a vegetable, and he was a vegetable, and that's what happened. He died, and unfortunately that sets up where we're going next, which is the real communist leader that we need to be aware of, and that's Stalin. And so Stalin is coming. And so just so you know how things played out, the last 10 years of Russia's history since 1914 have been awful. You have 1.8 million military deaths, 1.5 million civilian deaths, 20 to 30 million people die in the Russian Revolution. 10 to 15 million people die in the Civil War / famine. They had a famine going on. Lenin himself killed about 3.7 million people, and then what's coming beyond that is Stalin is going to be actually killing at least 20 million, maybe more. We don't know for sure. So, with that being said, you're looking at anywhere from 50 to 60 million people dying just based on the history of Russia in the next 20, 30 years. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was quick enough. Sorry I took so long. I tried to wrap it up, but you can always let me know if you have questions, and then the book is always a good resource as well.